let's begin. Today's session is going to cover two different parts. One is the fact of assumptions in business analysis, and the other is a technique called mind mapping. So, all right, let me begin straight away. I assume that my screen is visible. All right, let's begin with a little bit of text, a problem that has been provided by a professor who's looking to test his students in class. And he asks, just one of them, there are 10 birds sitting on a tree. You shot one. How many are left? Well, do you have an answer to this one? I can see a lot of answers coming right in. Well, this is one of the key reasons why we do not make assumptions. All of you have made an assumption. Let's test those assumptions. Generally, we ask for more information. So this is what the student did. First question, does a gun have a silencer? Is that a valid question for you? Does it change things when you know that there's a silencer involved? Absolutely. So this is the first assumption being tested. Is it illegal to shoot birds in this city? Well, we don't know if this is really relevant or not, but let's take the question. The answer is no. How do you verify that the bird that was shot died? So the professor says we can assume it. Okay, are any of the birds deaf? No. But if they were deaf, would it change things for us? Definitely. Okay. Are there one or more birds too stupid to know to fly away when they hear a gunshot? Well, that's an important question. So the answer is no, they are all normal birds. Are there any birds kept in cages? Which would mean that if they were in cages, they cannot fly away. No. Are there any other trees by the side and any other birds on the trees? No, this is the only tree within a radius of 500 meters. Are there any disabled or famished birds that can't fly? You see, we are now trying to get more information. Very often when we are working with in business analysis, and by the way, I would like to call out here, business analysis is generally meant to mean that it's for the IT industry, but that is not so. Business analysis is used in any and every industry because essentially what you're trying to do is to get a lot of bunch of people to agree to a particular problem and its solution set based on what kind of value it generates. So that can be in absolutely any industry. Coming back to our point here, do we count the eggs a bird may be carrying? They are all male. Did some of them choose to stay and were ready to die because their lover was shot? So I said they were all male. Is homosexuality okay? How do you determine their sexual orientation? Assume it is hetero for all. You see, every time we look at, I see a fantastic point here. What was the bird shot with? A gun or camera? Excellent. Is it possible that the one shot will take out more than one bird? If so, how many? No, only one bird is shot. But we did see how do you verify that the bird that was shot died, which means we are talking of a gun and not a camera. But fair enough. We continue. Well, if the dead bird is left stuck on the tree and does not fall from it, there will be one left. If he falls, there will be none left. This is what the student here comes up with after all of these questions. Okay, now let's try and see what this really means. What does mind mapping involve? Mind mapping involves using the information available. Excellent question, Mani. Mani has asked, what does it mean when you say how many are left? Are you asking how many are alive or how many are left on the tree? So let's start by trying to understand what the mind map should be doing. So I'm going to start creating a little mind map here. Okay. I have here, what was our question? 10 birds, oops, on a tree, one shot. How many birds remain? Now, we have a bunch of questions that we want to ask. Which are the questions that we are looking to ask? Let's take one set of questions pertaining to questions on the shot bird. Questions on the shot bird. What did we have? We had, let's go back. What was it? The software that I'm using to create the mind map is an open source thing called draw.io. DRAWIO, draw.io. If you could search for it, you can download it. It's completely free. You can use this. Draw.io allows you to, it's like a relatively simpler but free Visio. Visio comes from Microsoft. It costs an arm and a leg, but Draw.io is free and you can use it in most situations. Okay, so what were our questions? We said, how do you verify that the bird that was shot died? So how is the shot bird dead? And there's an answer to that. Similarly, is there anything else that we have pertaining to that shot bird? So is the dead bird stuck on the tree? So let me make a copy of this and say, is the dead bird stuck in the tree or not? So the way we build this is I have from here an arrow. I draw an arrow. Now, ideally, what I try and do is to ensure that this is a blue line and a blue, not green. There. This allows me to play around a little like this. Something went wrong. So let me stick it again. Yes. Stick this to the blue. Right. Now I can, in this manner, grow my thought process. The purpose of a mind map is to take our thoughts and put them down and organize them. We are just trying to organize our thoughts. Okay. So let's go back and we see we had a bunch of other questions. Does a gun have a silencer? So is this, how should I, okay, I'm going to simplify this for myself. I will copy this, we'll go back here and I will create a new one and paste it there. Oh, not paste it like that. Hmm. Oh, it doesn't allow me to paste it in any other manner. That's all right. I'm all right to paste it like that and keep it here. So I have, does a gun have a silencer? Similarly, I have, is it illegal to shoot birds in the city? Now, this is not really relevant, but I'm taking it nevertheless. I'm holding down the control key and making a copy of this. Paste. Back again. Uh, You see, I don't need to go all the way. I'm just trying to show you a general approach. Okay. So I have these questions. Are all of these questions of the same type? Or do you think that I can organize them differently? What is a placeholder of blue and green line in draw.io? All right. So when I click here, this blue connects in such a way that it allows me to move around the entire thing as I please. You see? But when it's green, green connects to those dots exactly on the system, not the box itself, but the specific sections which are highlighted. That's where it is green. Okay. So are any of the birds deaf? Does a gun have a silencer? These are not the same kind of questions. So these gun have a silencer. This is different. So let me remove this from here and call this so I could call these questions on other birds. Okay. So again, I take this, I connect here, I connect there. What is this then? These are probably something I could call general questions. Ooh, something's off with me today. Hmm. So when I take these questions, so when I start organizing my thoughts in this manner, this mind mapping gives me a better picture. Sometimes it also allows me to look at it and say, what am I missing? Is there something else that I should be thinking of? And start expanding this further and further. This is what mind mapping does. Of course, right now, I think I will color this a little. So it's clear that that's the center. So a mind map has one central element. That central element has a next set of questions, next set of thoughts, and beyond that, further concepts. And it can keep going on and on and on, depending on how complex you need it to be. You can make it that complex, but it's your choice. All right. So when you're working with mind maps, just keep in mind that the purpose is organizing. It won't be beautiful in the beginning. It can be pretty much all over the place. It will get ugly at times. But eventually, once you sort it all out, it can look something like this. Okay. Now, what we have here, so this is what the professor said. There are 10 birds, 9 live ones on the tree, and 1 dead on the ground. You made 3 incorrect assumptions. The dead bird is no longer to be counted. The ground is separate from the tree, which matches one of the questions which one of you brought up earlier to say what exactly is left where. The shooter was near the tree and the sound of the shot disturbed the birds. These are the 3 assumptions. Did all of you make these assumptions? Now, what actually happened is this. The shooter used a high-powered rifle from 2 kilometers away and shot the bird on the lowest branch furthest away from all the others, which disturbed none of them. What does this mean? This means that our assumptions define whether or not we are taking the right approach. If we make incorrect assumptions, which means that we are not getting our assumptions validated, that is the only difference between an assumption and a requirement. If an assumption has been validated, it becomes a requirement or a constraint. But if an assumption itself is not checked, if it's not validated, it remains an assumption and it may be wrong. There is also a situation where your assumption may not actually be used uh, because you have asked for it to be validated, but nobody knew the answer. So it stayed an assumption because no one knows the answer to that one. So these are the 2 kinds of states an assumption can have. It has been validated or not, or it has no known answer. Therefore, when we are looking at assumptions from the standpoint of a mind map, you see, these are our missed questions. We created everything, but we missed these questions. Can we count the dead bird as a bird? Left where? How many birds are left? What is left where? How is it defined? And what is the distance of the shooter from the tree? So we asked as a student, the student asked all of these questions, so many others, some one not even relevant, but missed 3 questions here. So an assumption, in short, is something that requires, so let me put that down here. Assumption requirement constraint. So this assumption must first be, let me remove this. Let me just use this. So when you have an assumption that has been validated, it can be become a requirement, it can become a constraint, and finally, it can remain an assumption. No known answer. Okay. So this is what happens when you're looking at the, when you're looking at an assumption. It stays an assumption, but it first needs to be validated. Do you validate your assumptions? That's the first question that you should be asking yourselves. I have a question from Abhay. So can we identify thought process of an individual based on the assumptions? Oh, absolutely. When you're looking at a set of assumptions, you're actually seeing how the person tries to solve a problem. So if you have someone trying to solve a problem, you first check how strong their assumptions are. If you find that their assumption creation skills, assumption writing skills are weak, that's the first thing to be developed because we must try and get more and more assumptions. Generally, when you have customers coming and explaining the problem to you, they give you a very small, short brief. Quite often, there are things that they haven't thought of. They're leaving it to us to think of them. And as business analysts, this is what we are supposed to do. First, think of all of the different types of assumptions. So, note down all the requirements, note down the constraints, and then take assumptions. So, if we know the requirements and we know the constraints already, we think of other assumptions. And then we check to see if they can be added in. At the end of the day, our document for uh, the business requirement document should focus on having a maximum number of called out and clear requirements and constraints with a minimum of assumptions, only those to which no known answer exists. All right, so far? Any questions? Okay, I'm now going to give you a little exercise. You can, if you wish, you can download draw.io or just use paper and pen and create a little set for yourselves. I'm going to give you one simple question. For that question, you have to create your own set of assumptions like this by calling out in your head different types of questions. You want to take 2 minutes and download draw.io? You can even use online draw.io. That's not a big deal. You don't need to download it. So if you go to IO, it will take you to appdiagrams.net and you can just save diagrams too. You can decide what you want to do or decide later. This will open it up in the browser. Okay, then you can just work with it as is. And for those of you who are using on the desktop, perfectly all right. So let me give you the question. Hmm. Hmm. All right, let me just place it here. Okay, this is your question. Take a few minutes, come up with as many as you can think of, as many assumptions as possible. Write them down. Don't put them in the chat yet. Okay, remember the point here is not to look at this as the question itself being the answer. We need generally a lot more information. So, what should be the additional information that you have around this? What is the information that you do need to have? So, now if you have created those additional assumptions, can you paste them in here? Excellent. I can see lots of posts coming in.
The children can be young or old. So our first question is children. When we say children, that's our first noun. Let's ask the question as to how different the children are from each other. And if they are different, children can be different in multiple ways. They can be different in their intent, they can be different in their strength, they can be different in so many different things. Yes, when we speak of bales, so bales themselves can be of different sizes. They may not be the same size of bale. So each bale could be different. We are saying hay, but is the bale of hay, is it always the same kind of hay or is it different types of hay? Are they even in the same place, all of them? Maybe some of these children are in India and some of them are in Alaska. Imagine trying to work with hay in the extreme cold and still doing it. It won't be the same. And yes, some of them may have equipment, some of them may not have equipment. That's a good point. You may also have to look at brakes. Is the hay bundles tied up? Are they all tied up or are they loosely placed? Can one child place only one bale at a time? Wonderful thought, because it's possible that one of them could use both hands to pick up two bales and place them. So when you're working on something like this, you are essentially looking at asking the right kind of questions. I'm happy to see that you're bringing in different thoughts. What about if it rains? What happens if there is snow? How much weight can one child stack, etc., etc. This is what happens when you are placed in a situation where someone gives you a requirement. That requirement may seem simple. In fact, one of the commonest thing that you will find customers saying, or stakeholders to be more generic, is the ask is very simple. Remember that whenever you hear this ask is very simple, it only means that people have not done a sufficient bit of thinking. And that's why it seems simple. It means that they have not tested out assumptions. So if assumptions have not been tested, and it's the same thing, you will keep hearing this. The ask is very simple. Yes, the ask is very simple, but the fact that it seems simple implies that we need to give it a lot more thought. Okay. So keep in mind that anytime you're looking at a mind map, the mind map's purpose is to help us think beyond that little question, the simple ask that has been put forth to us. How do you go beyond that simple ask? By writing down a bunch of assumptions. Again, there will always be some assumptions that are not even relevant. So you weed those out before you take them across to discuss them with the stakeholders. But whatever it is, your assumptions must be validated. Now, what is the difference between a requirement and a constraint? Why does an assumption become a requirement or a constraint? Can anyone tell me what could be the answer for this? What really is a constraint? A constraint is also kind of a requirement. Keep that in mind. But a constraint, as the word shows us, is a form of limitation. It is a requirement yes, it is a requirement which defines boundaries. Let's take a simple example of a constraint. When we look at this example that we were seeing earlier, shot fired at one bird out of 10 in a tree, how many left? What is the constraint here? What are our constraints here? Only one bird has been shot. Besides that, only one tree. So our constraints are one bird shot and one tree. Those are our constraints. The boundary of our problem, the scope of our problem. Anytime you hear someone tell you what is the scope refers primarily to constraints. What is scope creep? In business analysis, scope creep is a killer of projects because scope creep happens when the boundary is uncertain and all the stakeholders are not agreed on the scope, on the constraints, and someone believes that the constraint is less than or more than what it should be. So if you have scope itself which is unclear, it means constraints that have been ill-defined. So assumption here, we have taken that assumption to find out whether there are other trees nearby and other birds. This is how we have validated and created the constraint of a single tree. How many birds with one shot allowed us to constrain the shot bird to one? So when we are dealing with assumptions that have to be validated to become requirements or constraints, that is easier. Can you think of an example of how assumptions don't have any known answers and therefore they remain an assumption? It's quite possible that we don't know whether any of the birds are disabled or their gender or whether they are deaf. It's quite possible that a lot of these, yes, we know that eggs are not to be counted. Silencer on a gun, that is an assumption to which we may not know the answer. So a lot of these, when you do not know the answer, it remains as an assumption. How is this assumption, which remains without known answers, to be treated? What do we do with in any project when you have assumptions that are left behind because they have no known answer? It means that as and when these things do occur, because we do not know at this moment, as and when these do occur, we will have to rediscuss and then decide whether it is a requirement or a constraint, or if it has to be ignored and left out of scope or included in the scope. And that is why this has to be listed out separately. Your document should have an assumption list, and against each assumption, there should be some level of detail in explanation and call out that we do not know the answer. Assumptions can be functional, they can be non-functional, they can be of any kind. They are not limited. So assumptions for which we do not have answers can come from any bucket. Many times scope creep happens because we have not called out the leftover assumptions. And if you have not called out the leftover assumptions, when they do occur, it will be understood that they have to be treated, that they have to be worked upon. Only when you call them out as assumptions which remain unaddressed, that's when you know that, okay, all of these assumptions, if they do occur, will require a fresh discussion. All right. Now, how exactly do you go about converting assumptions to requirement or constraints? How do you validate? Any thoughts? Yes, the stakeholders will validate, you're right. But how will they validate? On what basis will they validate? How do you present an assumption for validation? Remember, it's just an assumption. At this point, we may not have any data, we may not have any fact, no use cases. Well, use cases are a good way. You may not have metrics, but use cases are a good way of using assumptions. So you take an assumption. So in this case, our assumption is any birds caged. Okay. So we say any birds caged. That is our assumption. How will we get that validated? We are taking any birds caged. How will we validate this assumption with stakeholders? Generally, the simplest way is to provide an explanation for this assumption. So, for example, let me take any birds caged. And I call out, if a bird is caged, it cannot fly away. We call it out. It is not enough for us to assume that the meaning of any bird's cage is obvious to all stakeholders. So we call it out. For validation, we ask that question, make that statement. If a bird is caged, it cannot fly away. That is why we are asking this. What happens now? What was the answer? No. So where should it go? Where should I place the answer? Is it a requirement or is it a constraint? Absolutely. I'm very happy to see that you've all got that right. It is clearly a constraint. So now this is how we validate the assumption. We start with the the basic assumption statement. We add an explanation as to why that assumption has to be and how it has to be validated. And finally, we convert that to a requirement or a constraint, and we add this to the list of constraints. Anytime you have a list of assumptions, keep this in mind, this flow, because this flow will help you reuse the same approach with absolutely any assumption. If we were to switch and say any deaf birds, what should the statement be? So this is where we have that same simple statement. If a bird is deaf, it won't hear the shot and will not fly away. So again, we have a constraint, no deaf bird. So you see, it really doesn't matter how complex your solution is. At the end of the day, when you're doing business analysis at the earliest stages, we have to call out all the assumptions. We have to study the assumptions, present them for validation, and either switch them to requirement or constraint. And if they are left as an assumption, call it out separately as an assumption with all these statements, this and this together, and the assumption because we don't know the answer. All right. This is where we work with assumptions and mind maps. Do you know of any other techniques to build assumptions further? Mind map is one. Do you know of any others? Anyone? Voice of customer. Well, flow charts and BPM and swim lanes, all of these are actually nothing but enhanced mind maps. Think of them as mind maps that are a little uh, that are more detailed. Root cause analysis. Yes, a root cause analysis is, yes, I do believe you will get a recording. So, root cause analysis, game theory, well, yes, but it's not everyone's cup of tea to use game theory. It is a more advanced technique and generally not familiar to all our stakeholders. That's why we try and use simpler, more basic systems. A mind map is something people can visually look at, the same as with flowcharts, BPMN diagrams, anything. And yes, voice of customer helps us identify more better requirements, better constraints, but not necessarily assumptions. Well, the fishbone is a great one. The Ishikawa diagram, or the fishbone as it's popularly known as, is great because it uses a variation of the mind map. It is again just a simple variation of the mind map. And as a variation, it will allow you to structure it slightly better. So, with all of these options available, why would you use a mind map? With such a variety available, why would you use a mind map? Absolutely, it has no rules. You can play around with it however you wish. It's easy enough for absolutely anybody to understand. It's highly flexible. You can create it however you please. You can change it however you please. When you're using a mind map, you are effectively allowing your stakeholders to look at the mind map and think further. Because, like you said, it's a visually organized information, and this visually organized information pushes for more thought from stakeholders. So, whenever you're working with assumptions, my go to is a mind map. At a later point in time, I will bring in more and more techniques. But the mind map is something irrespective of the level of knowledge of the subject that my stakeholder has. They can all relate to it. So, how comfortable do you think you are in creating a mind map? Mm. I generally pick up very simple statements like you saw here. This is from a social media forward. I have picked up something from there and given it thought around assumptions. So I have built assumptions around this. In this manner, pick up standard simple things that you use on a day to day basis, problems that you see everywhere, and create assumptions. When you start building assumptions, you will find that it's easier for you, it's simpler, and you will get into the habit of creating assumptions. Assumptions are it's like a muscle. You have to practice it. You have to keep working on assumptions all the time. Everything that we do, you remember at the start of the session when I asked that question, practically all of you had an answer. When I asked this, we all tend to, and this is human nature, we tend to solve. We tend to want to solve a problem. However, we are all hesitant to ask more questions and search for more information. So, if you have to travel the distance from where you are to where you need to be to get assumptions right, ask yourself simple questions. Can you think of a statement in your everyday life around which you could start looking at assumptions, build assumptions? Take something from work. Fastest route to office, work from home to work from office. Yes. What else? Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is part of a much larger set of sessions. It's part of a bigger training. I will not be sharing this PPT. Troubleshooting. Okay. So let's say fastest route to office. What do you think should be our assumptions around fastest route to office? Generally, almost all of us tend to trust Google Maps. But the first assumption is Google Maps always providing us the best route? Because sometimes Google Maps takes us into such narrow lanes with such difficult terrain that while it was all right when it took us down that road, when we actually reach there, there's a vehicle coming from the opposite direction and we get stuck and it takes longer. Climate, yes. All of these different approaches that we have, day to day problems, we have to ask ourselves if the information that we use to take decisions are, if that information is enough. Generally, it is not. Generally, we take split second decisions without having enough information. How many of you have decided within 15 seconds of meeting somebody that you don't really like them? Or how many of you have decided that you enter a space and you get a great feel and you think, I would love to live here? A lot of these are based on incorrect or insufficient information. And it is important for us to get more information to take a better decision. That's why assumptions are always important. And that's why I always say work on building your assumptions. Keep asking more and more questions so that you get a lot more. Yes, the mood of the day can push us to like or dislike. And the mood of the day is also designed based on our particular circadian rhythm. Some of us are perform better in the morning, some of us perform better in the evening or the afternoon. So I do recommend this book called, I'm typing it here. It's a simple enough title. It's called When. Read it. You will definitely appreciate the thought process that goes behind it. So I don't quite remember the author. Give me a moment. Typically, if you type when, you should be able to get it. Daniel H. Pink. Yes, that's the one. Daniel H. Pink. When the Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. That's the book. So when you're working on assumptions, keep in mind, whatever it is, we don't know enough. Always remember, we don't know enough. I see that we are on upon the hour. Thank you all for your participation in this session. And I hope that you've learned something that you can apply. Thank you.